Good evening, universe. Tonight I want to talk about some books that I think are underrated. These are ones that I haven't really seen people talk about or that I haven't heard people mention in conversation. Books that I think that just deserve a little bit more time in the spotlight. So these are all going to be either young adult or middle grade, and it's possible that that's part of the reason that they are underrated, that people don't talk about them as much, even though YA is pretty popular still. I feel like a lot of the content that I watch leans more towards adult fantasy, so maybe that's why I haven't seen them. But either way, I want to talk about these series because I think they're amazing. And I'm going to go in order of how big the series is. So I'm going to start with a standalone, and then I'm going to go up to a series that has 5 books. And then we've got a bunch in between. And my rule for this is also that the series has to be complete. So there are some other series that I would definitely include on this list, except that I haven't finished reading them yet. So I didn't want to include them until I see how the ending goes, to make sure that it's a series that I can really get behind. So here we go, starting with the first book, which like I said is a standalone. You've probably, if you've been on this channel before this video, you've probably heard me mention it before. And this is going to be 1,000 Steps Into Night by Traci, Chee. Look at this beautiful cover, first of all. I absolutely adore this book. So this book is a young adult fantasy, and it is about a teenage girl who has contact with a demon and then starts to become a demon herself. So she goes on this adventure to stop becoming a demon. To me, this had really intense Miyazaki, Spirited Away kind of vibes. And I absolutely loved it for that. I really enjoyed just the writing style. I think is beautiful, and the characters are so much fun. There's a side character who I absolutely love. This is a great, fun fantasy adventure. It's not super heartbreaking or anything like that, even though we have another series by this author, which is pretty heartbreaking. That's also going to be on this list. This one in particular is pretty lighthearted. As far as things go, there are still some dramatic and dark moments, but it doesn't lean in that direction too much. This is a great one for if you've been reading a lot of really dark young adult fantasy and you want something a little bit less intense, a little bit less heavy, then I would definitely recommend 1,000 Steps Into Night. Next up is a duology, and this is going to be Crier's War and Iron Heart by Nina Varela. Aren't they beautiful? Once again, I'm going to do this with like all the books, but I think these covers are so pretty, and I have the hardcovers and they're so beautiful. I don't usually get hardcovers. Actually, I think most of the books on this list will be hardcovers, but I usually prefer paperbacks. But in this case, I really wanted the hardcovers because they're kind of like embossed, so they're really nice. So if you get this series, I do recommend getting the hardcovers. And what the series is about is this is a sapphic story, so it does have a romance element between 2 women, and there is an enemies to lovers component to that romance. It's about Crier, who is an android, basically. I believe they're called Autome in this series, so they're like fantasy robots that look like people, and they kind of rule society. And then we have a human girl who is kind of a rebel against the ruling class, but this is a secret, right? She does her rebel activities in secret. She wants revenge for an event that occurred. I really loved this series. I loved Crier as a character. She's the Autome one, and I enjoyed Isla, but not as much as I enjoyed Crier. I think Isla has a really good arc, and I enjoyed her a lot more in the second book. So if you read the first book and you're not sure if it's worth it to pick up the second book, I definitely think that it is. It has some really fun twists and some great moments. It also has a little bit of a dystopian sort of feeling to it because of the ruling class of the Autome. There's like a history at the beginning of the book that I think a lot of people, the first book, that I think a lot of people didn't really enjoy, but I thought it was a nice way to kind of set the stage for where we're at in the story. And I just really enjoyed this. I thought it had a great writing style. It felt very immersive. I really felt like I was living in the world. And I thought the romance was great. The characters are so fun. This one, it does lean a little bit darker than the previous book that I recommended. There are definitely some really dark moments, some heaviness. Like I said, Isla has vengeance for some pretty terrible events that occurred previous to the story. But it also had some great emotional moments, and I definitely think this is a wonderful fantasy. I've seen people talk about this a little bit, so this is probably one of the less underrated ones on this list. But I haven't seen people talk about the duology as a whole, so I feel like a lot of people didn't pick up Iron Heart, and I really think it is a great conclusion to the series. I think it is a wonderful follow-up, really builds on the first book in a successful way. So if you somewhat liked Crier's War, I do think Iron Heart is even better than Crier's War, and I do recommend checking it out. Next up, we have a trilogy, and this is going to be Shadow Magic is the first one. These are not in order. Let's try that again. This is the Shadow Magic trilogy by Joshua Kahn, and this is a middle grade trilogy. I will say that I feel like this series was intended to be 5 books because the ending feels a little bit not perfect as an ending, but I still thought it was really satisfying. I think he did a good job of wrapping it up for a trilogy that felt like it was maybe supposed to continue. The characters are so fun. So what this is about is a young boy, Thorn, ends up going to this very spooky kingdom, which is ruled by necromancers. The royal families of each kingdom has like a special magical ability that they're empowered with. And this particular kingdom, it's all necromancy. So they are very scary compared to the other kingdoms. And so Thorn goes to this kingdom and meets the princess who has just inherited the throne, and she is Thorn's age too. So we follow 2 young protagonists. Her name is Lilith, but she goes by Lily, and she is coming into her necromantic powers. And so these books follow the adventures of Lily and Thorn as Lily tries to get to the bottom of some secrets around her magic and tries to figure out her powers. I would say Lily is really more of the protagonist than Thorn is, but Thorn is a great lead too. These books are a wonderful middle grade adventure. They are so much fun. I loved the characters. I loved having a necromancer be the lead. And there are just lots of fun moments with lots of fun mysteries. I enjoyed this series so much. I couldn't wait to get the second 2 books, which is why they're in hardcover in this particular case. I highly recommend them if you're looking for a middle grade series yourself, or if you have a young reader in your life and they are kind of not really sure what fantasy series they want to read next. I definitely recommend the Shadow Magic series. It is so great. Next, we are back to YA and a return to Traci Chee with the Reader trilogy. The Reader, the Speaker, and the Storyteller. This is also known as the Sea of Ink and Gold trilogy. And this follows Sephia, who, well, first off, what you need to know is that this takes place in a world where people basically they have like pictograms, but they don't really have like the written word. As such, they have, symbols to represent things, but not really letters. So people don't really read in this world. And they don't have books or anything like that. And so this follows Sephia, who discovers a book. And there are all sorts of secrets in it that she starts to discover as she learns how to read. This also follows this second adventure of a ship. And so there's like a pirate adventure at the same time as you follow Sephia. You also follow this completely separate adventure. And then they crisscross in really exciting ways. I love the magic of this series. As usual, Traci Chee's writing is just gorgeous. The prose is incredible. The world is really engaging. Sephia is a great character, and the supporting cast is fantastic. I did have some complaints about the ending, just because endings are hard. I really wanted a little bit more to the ending, which the last book is pretty long. The last book is like 500 pages, so it was pretty long, but I did want a little bit more of the, after the climax. I really wanted a little bit more time to kind of settle in with the characters. This one is definitely sadder than the others that I've recommended. This is probably the darkest series on this list. It has the heaviest themes, the heaviest emotions, and is probably the saddest. So do know that. But if you want a great heartbreaking time, I definitely recommend this trilogy. Next, we have the final trilogy on this list, and that is going to be the Camelot Rising trilogy. I know I only have 2 books here, but that is because I don't have the 3rd book, but I have read it. I just haven't found it in paperback anywhere, and I did want to get the paperback version of it. But this is the Guinevere Deception, the Camelot Betrayal, and the Excalibur Curse, and these are by Kiersten White. This is another YA series, and it is a retelling of the King Arthur legend. We follow Guinevere, who, I'm trying to figure out a way to explain the plot without spoiling anything. At the beginning of the book, she becomes Arthur's bride. We know from the beginning that she is not who she says she is in some capacity. And the first book really delves into figuring out exactly what that means. I loved the magic system in this. She has kind of this earthy not magic that she uses, and I thought it was so great. This is another one that I really felt like I was living in the world. The characters, Guinevere, fantastic. I absolutely loved Guinevere. I loved the potential love interests because there are several in this series, and I loved all of them. So it definitely felt very heart-wrenching to try and figure out who is she going to end up with, what is going to happen with these romantic interests. The conclusion of the romances is so perfect. I love it so much. The ending is fantastic in this series. I really don't think people talk about this one. I think Kiersten White is mostly known for the Anti-Darken series, which I think is like the Conqueror's Saga or something like that, which I enjoyed also, but the Guinevere Deception, Camelot Rising is so good. I loved it so much, the twists and turns, and these books aren't too long either, as you can see. That's 2 books. And they're just very readable, very enjoyable, fantastic YA fantasy series. I adored it. The themes were so consistent throughout all 3 books and just really fantastic. That was our last trilogy. Obviously, trilogies are going to be the big ones. And the next one is kind of not a fantasy series. It has fantastical elements, though, and I think it is technically shelved as fantasy. I think it counts. Barely. Well, it doesn't say in here whether it counts as fantasy or not. But I would mostly say that it is a mystery series. And I guess I'll tell you what it is at some point. So this is the All the Wrong Questions series by Lemony Snicket. This is another one that if you've been on my channel for a while, you have probably heard me mention. It is so good. The prose is incredible. If you like Lemony Snicket, like from the series of Unfortunate Events, if, for example, you read a series of Unfortunate Events and didn't really like the ending, I would say that you're probably still going to have problems with this series because the ending does have some of the same. It's more conclusive than a series of Unfortunate Events. And I just feel like his prose got so much better than in a series of Unfortunate Events. And his character building, like I felt like we really got to know the characters better, even though there's only 4 books in the series. It's middle grade, once again, and it's a mystery series. So the way that a series of Unfortunate Events is kind of a play on Gothic literature, this is more of a play on like a crime noir situation. And it follows Lemony Snicket when he is 13 doing an apprenticeship in a city called Stained by the Sea. I love this series so much. I've read it several times. I'm probably going to read it again soon because it is just so fantastic. The emotional beats are wonderful. I love this setting so much. I love the voice, and it's a great, fun adventure. If you liked a series of Unfortunate Events, I do think you would like All the Wrong Questions as well. I personally like All the Wrong Questions better than a series of Unfortunate Events. I just think that he improved as a writer because this came out later. It is a prequel, but it came out much later. And I just think it is so good. I love it so much. Like I said, there are some fantastical elements. So this technically barely kind of counts. And finally, the last series on my list is a proper fantasy. It's middle grade. Again, it is 5 books long, and it is the Magesterium series by Cassandra Clare and Holly Black. It's kind of weird for me to say it's underrated because it's from 2 quite well-known writers, but I feel like people talk about their other works and not really this one so much, possibly because this is middle grade and people feel like they're too old for it maybe. But these books follow Callum Hunt, who goes by Call, and he has to go to a test in the first book to get into wizard school. But he and his dad hate wizard school. I think they're called magicians in this, actually. So they hate magicians and magic and anything to do with magic at all. So Call is going to try to fail his test and prove that he is not a magician, that he doesn't belong at the Magesterium. And then we get into a whole bunch of backstory later throughout the series. It follows Call and the friends he makes on his adventures and kind of how he got to hate magic and the origins of Call and his powers. I loved this series. It's a really fun read. It's funny. Call is a great main character. I loved following him. The magic system is really cool. Call eventually gets a pet who is a lot of fun. This is just a great, magic school series. Each one follows a different sort of mystery that Call is figuring out that has to do a little bit with his past and himself and some other people. I'm trying really hard not to give anything away, but each one is kind of mysterious and magic school-y. So if you happen to like mysterious magic school type books, I would definitely recommend these as a further read in that series. If you have a youngster who is really into a particular magic school and really likes the mysteries, I think the Magesterium would be a great place to read beyond that. So those were all the series that I feel are kind of underrated here on BookTube. I hope you found something new that you might really enjoy. That's pretty much all I have to say for today. So thank you so much for hanging out with me, and have a great night, universe.